Welcome, Rav Johnny Solomon. I'd like to just take a minute to introduce you to, if any of my viewers aren't familiar yet with who you are. You are a rabbi, a teacher, a writer, you do spiritual coaching, and you have this magical way of taking whatever it is that's pertinent in the day, be it the Daf Yomi, the Parsha, the holidays, and extracting something deep and meaningful and sharing it in the most articulate way that really hits home for many people. And I suggest anyone who's not familiar yet should follow you, because there is so much that we can learn from everything that you write. So that's a little bit about you, and I'm hoping that people can get a glimpse of a little bit of what you have to share through our video. And for those who know you, they know. So this week's Parsha is Vayera, and it is packed Parsha with so much to learn from. It's incredible. It is kind of hard to get past the beginning. Most people focus on the Akedah because the Akedah is something that really hits hard to a lot of people. But I would like to, if we can, start at the very beginning and discuss more, especially because of today's day and age, where people want to put things in either the bad or good category, and things are, as we know, more nuanced than that. And I would like to really take a close look at the way Abraham acts and the way Lot interacts with the Malachim, with you, to focus a little bit on that, to try and understand. I think it's in trying to understand and get a little bit into the psyche and what motivates people and how they act and why they act, and how that could lead to good or bad and otherwise, whatever we can glean from it. So I'd like to open it up by asking you maybe where exactly would you like to start this discussion, and we'll move on from there.
So first, it's a great privilege. Aliza and I have known each other for a while. We've learned together, we've shared Torah together, and it's a great privilege to be on this platform together. So as you say, Parshat Vayera is a fascinating parsha, and I want to begin with the first pasuk, but perhaps focusing on a word that's often overlooked and a chazal that's often overlooked. We've met Avram and Sarah until now. In fact, we've met Lot as well, and both of them in their different ways, and the dynamic between them is really going to be the focus of our conversation today. But who are Avram and Sarah? They are this powerhouse who feel that they can connect with God and have helped other people connect with God. They have a real sense of loyalty and love to God, and a real sense of mission to share belief in God with others. And then at the end of last week's parsha, God asks Avram to do something which, according to the Medrash, as explained by various Hasidic teachers, worries Avram deeply. God says to Avram, have a Brit Milah, and this is going to be a pathway for you to self-improve further and become an even more loyal servant to me. And the Medrash Tanchuma says that Avram was really anxious about whether this was the right thing to do or not. And why was he so anxious? Because one of the great qualities of Avram and Sarah was the fact that they opened their house to anybody, that they mixed with everybody. They weren't exclusively only talking to the faithful or those amongst their friendship circle. They would talk with anybody and everybody. And Avram was deeply worried that by having a physical impression, a physical expression of his loyalty to God, he'd be so different to others that they'd see him to be almost of another people, somebody that they couldn't relate to. He was frightened by having a Brit Milah. It would alienate him from the rest of humanity, and in so doing, diminish his capacity to make known the name of God. And Chazal tell us that Avram consulted with some friends. The Medrash Tanchuma tells us that he spoke to 3 of his friends. Who are those? Oner, Eshkol, and Mamre. And the first 2 give various reasons why it would be a bad idea to take God's advice. Either that Avram is going to get in trouble with others who wished to pursue him. He'd already had scrapes with the local kings. Or he's just too old. What are you doing, putting yourself through an operation? And Mamre gives him the following advice, which is, God's looked after you until now. Why do you doubt God? If you are as faithful as you tell me you are, and God says that doing a Brit Milah, it won't diminish your capacity, instead it will strengthen it. Go, my friend. Now what Mamre was doing is recognizing the fact that Avram was about to get a spiritual turbo boost, and maybe on a friendship level, Mamre would have less time and feel less individual connection with his dear friend Avram. But nevertheless, that's what a friend does. When a friend sees another and they have a possibility of a spiritual turbo boost, a real friend, somebody who really loves them, says, go with it. And the first pasuk of Parshat Vayera therefore starts, Vayera elav Hashem be'elonei Mamre. And this prompts Rashi, quoting the Medrash, to say, why Elonei Mamre? And Chazal say, because we wanted to record Mamre, to give him credit that without him, Avram may not have gone through with this Brit Milah. And I begin with this point because, as we're going to see, this hunger, this yearning to connect with people, this desire to make an impact, this belief that your task in this world is to affect change, was so central to who Avram was, that he was petrified by having a Brit Milah that would somehow ebb away from him. And he was deeply grateful to his friend Mamre, who reassured him that that wasn't going to take place. So that's, I suppose, where we begin. And then Rashi tells us, what is Avram doing? He then has the Brit Milah. And I think there's a moment in Avram where he's still not sure whether Mamre's promise, whether God's promise is going to take place. Why? He's sitting outside in the heat of the day, waiting for guests. Now, what is he doing? Why doesn't he go inside and just heal, look after himself? Because I think one is related to the other. For him, having a Brit Milah, his worry was it was going to disconnect himself from people. So Avram says, I'm going to have the Brit Milah, but I want to help more people. I want to keep my house open. I want to be receptive to all passers-by. And so he wanted a reassurance, not just in word, but through actions, that he could reach out and give acts of kindness to others, reach out and connect with others. And so he says, Rashi, he meets the air momentarily when there are no passers-by. And he's relieved when there are, because it's as if an affirmation that God's keeping his promise. It's as if it's an affirmation of Mamre's advice that it will go well, and that he won't have done something on himself that will push other people away from himself. So those are my first thoughts about the parasha. I don't know. This is something which I know you're familiar with, Aliza. What are your thoughts about Avram, this choice he makes? Sometimes we make choices about how we live religiously. And we're right about how we'll alienate people. And some friends say, stay as you are, don't change. And other friends say, grow and I'll be with you. What do you see from that conversation?
Right. It's interesting because I don't see it. I hear everything you're saying, but I also heard alternatively that when they said that he consulted with Mamre, that it wasn't specifically on whether he should follow God's command, but how should he go about following God's command. And that speaks to me more, because I think Abraham, we see instinctively, even to sacrifice his own son, will follow God's command. But two things that are important is as we've seen from in Bereshit, when if you go by the explanation, when God wants to create man and he says he consults with the angels, that this is something we learned from God, that whatever you're going to do, you should consult with those closest to you. And it was an act of, it was a good midah, it was a good character trait to consult with people. And it's always good to hear the people that you know and you trust. Like you said, Mamre was a very trustworthy friend. And to get a feel and to hear what he has to say, and not necessarily will he change his mind, but just to show also, I think that makes a big Kiddush Hashem, to show that you're not all ego and that you value other people around you, and that he made alliance with Mamre for a reason, not just because he has something to offer Mamre, but Mamre has something to offer him. And it's an important part of trust, is not to always to be the giver, but to show the other person that they can give you as well. And I think that's a big part of chesed. And I think that I like that interpretation. That speaks to me very much. And we see that, so I heard that it's whether should he have done this publicly or should he have done this privately? And you see him doing a little bit of both. So here he does the Brit Mila was more of a private for him in his home, but then you see after finally when he has Yitzchak, and Yitzchak is weaned, then he makes a mishteh and does a Hodula Hashem in a public service of God. So, maybe he felt that he wanted to publicize God's greatness, but he'd rather have done it in a way to show, when there's a good outcome where it wasn't going to invite people that were either going to mock or be naysayers. Because when you're doing something like a Brit Milah, as we know, even down till today, even when we have doctors and people saying that it's not only not harmful, it's beneficial, you'll still have people that mock it. Kal v'chomer, in those days, when they don't even really not aware of all this, that people will be like, what are you doing? That's your God? Mm-hmm. So I think he took the best of the advice and he moved forward from there. But I also, I would like to look, that's the way I personally see it, and I guess I'm going to keep it at that for now.
Well, I totally agree with you. You mentioned I'm a spiritual coach, and I was recently reading through Rabbi Sax's newest book, Morality, and he should be well. Unfortunately, he's going through treatment for cancer. And one of the chapters in his book discusses self-help. And he says, in our modern world, we've been led to think that we can all fix our own problems.
Right.
He says, ultimately, sure, there are certain things that we need to take responsibility for as individuals, but nevertheless, real help is other help. And as you say, the stories about the Malachim, both going back to Bereshit at the very beginnings and here in the Parsha in a very, very pointed way, and here with Avram too, tell us that a person should never think that they can solve things at all. En dan yechidi ela echad. Only HaKadosh Baruch Hu stands on his own as a sole agent. And our task is to look out for others, and it's also to heed the advice of others. And the people I meet in coaching, oftentimes, they can frame the issues going on in their life. What they need is a little nudge. They need a sounding board. They need a little bit of clarity. It's not so much that Mamre said a chiddush to Avram, but Mamre gave an affirmation to Avram, and he reassured him that it's going to be okay. And in the most part, I think a lot of us do have a sense of the direction we want to go in life. We need others to make us know that we're not alone and it's going to be okay. And that's how people make sometimes very bold choices about their lives. But so here is Avram and here is Sarai, and they go through this journey. And as I say, part of Avram and Sarai's personality is the ability to connect with others and share with others. And that's why Avram had these worries. You say, as to how to do the Brit Milah, or if to do the Brit Milah, I think that's a fascinating question. But nevertheless, this was on his mind. And then the Malachim come, not only are they there, that means he's not cut off, but they come and bear great news. And that too must have been a further sign, not just for the long-term yearning to have a family, but also a sign to say, God's still with me and people are still with me. Don't forget that Chazal that tells us that when the Malachim come, Avram Avinu is in communion with God. And Avram basically puts God on call waiting to go and talk to the angels, right? Right? Greater is the act of showing hospitality than even receiving the greatness of God in your home. So he goes to talk to the people, but he's making a choice. It's God or the people. And we're taught there a principle, which is sometimes it's okay to walk away from a communion with God in order to talk to people, but they bear news about something godly. And Avram then feels, I'm not having to make that choice. It's not either I connect with people and feel a distance from God or vice versa. HaKadosh Baruch Hu is with me, and I'm able to have guests in my home and help them with very physical things. You know, the story is very physical, talks about the bread and talks about the food he makes. You don't have to go to heaven. Lo b'shamayim, the Torah tells us. Avram's being shown here that you can be profoundly divine by preparing food for people. And that's what he wanted. He wants to be involved in the lives of others, actively involved in helping people, and yet doing that as an expression of his divine mission, right? His purpose of being an Eved Hashem. So Avram is now reassured, and he provides this worldly provisions for these malachim, and in so doing is rewarded with the knowledge that he is both blessed in this world and God is also bestowing on him blessings. And after he's told that they're going to have a child, we know the story of Sarah laughing and that whole conversation that is had therein. Soon afterwards, there is a conversation had between HaKadosh Baruch Hu and Avram. One where, as you talked about, this idea of seeking guidance. Avram seeks guidance from Mamre, and then God says, I'm going to seek guidance of Avram. Why? Because he's about to make a radical decision about the people of Sodom. He says, the people have veered in the wrong direction. They have unfortunately become perpetual sinners. And God has a plan, and the plan doesn't look so great. God says, I'm going to take a look and make sure that my evaluation is correct. But prior to that, God shares his intentions with Avram. And what's interesting is Avram has this negotiation with God. It's a well-known story in the Tanakh, right? If you can find 50 or 40 or 30, etc., etc. And classically, we are told that this is an expression of chutzpah klapei shmaya. Avram showing that kind of positive chutzpah that the Jewish people are renowned for, challenging God, but because he's actually invoking the principles that he'd learned from God and been inspired by God, those of human dignity, those of human life. And so we have this moral debate, this moral argument between himself and HaKadosh Baruch Hu. But just last week, I saw a really remarkable insight in an essay published in the most recent edition of Tradition, penned by Professor Nechama Price. And she says something which I'm sure, it's when you read it, you realize it's so obvious. Why is Avram negotiating with God? Why is he so insistent that there are righteous people in Sodom? And the answer is, who's in Sodom? And that is Lot, his nephew. Lot, who accompanied him, lived with him and Sarah, right? Once his brother passed on. And they journeyed together from Haran to Eretz Israel. And then, later on in Parshat Lech Lecha, there is strife amongst the shepherds of Avram and Lot, and Lot chooses to go to Sodom. But who is in Sodom? Lot. And what does Avram think of Lot? Well, he's his family. Avram has taught Lot many things. One thing that we know, and in fact the Radak points this out, is when we say Bet HaNefesh Asher B'Charan, in the beginning of Parshat Lech Lecha, Radak says that wasn't just Avram and Sarah, it was also Lot. He was involved in encouraging and in chizuk and teaching the truth of God and proselytizing. So what's the Havamina, to use a Talmudic term, of Avram? The Havamina is, if my nephew Lot is in Sodom, he's definitely affected change with the people he's met. He's definitely inspired some people. I mean, he lived in my house. He was involved in helping other people from Haran. He saw how we did things. He saw how committed I was to being able to connect with people and share the truth of God and promote morality in a pagan world. The way Professor Price puts it is, Avram negotiates with God because he's convinced that Lot has saved some people. He's convinced that Lot has made a difference in Sodom in one level or another. What's disappointing is he hasn't. So I was very struck. I always thought that was a conversation between Avram and HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and then they get to Sdom where Lot is. And she suggests it's between Avram and HaKadosh Baruch Hu, all about Avram's expectations of Lot and what he would have, what he should have achieved in Sdom. What do you think about that idea?
Well, I think it's really nice to want to attribute credit to Lot, but at the same time, I don't see it as filled with all sorts of good deeds that Abraham is. I don't think he's naive, and I do think that he saw signs from Lot that even though he thinks he might have learned some good things in his home, he saw the problems that were so difficult that even Avram's people couldn't live with Lot's people. So if Avraham himself couldn't live with them, how are these people going to affect positive change? Like all the good that Lot saw and might have done if he contributed in the nefesh that they made in Haran and all this, might be because his personality is more of a when in Rome, and he's in Avram's home and that's what they're doing, and so that's what he's doing. And maybe when he gets over to Sodom, he just doesn't have that strength to be that person to affect change. And he's more of, some people are leaders, some people are followers. And I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing, because I don't think everybody can be a leader. So, and a leader needs followers or they're not going to be a leader. You can't have a world full of leaders. But the important thing is if you are a follower, you're still taken to task for making the right decisions in who to follow. And Lot, we see him tagging along and it's very clear to me from the way that the Pasukim tell us the narrative from the beginning when we see him all the way until the end, that he is a tag along. God says to leave and to take your family. He doesn't say anything about Lot, and it says, and Lot went with him, and then it says Abraham took Lot. And then again, when he left Mitzrayim, he didn't really have a choice. I looked at it closely. It's like Paro threw him and all his people out. It's like, get out of here. And I don't think that he necessarily even wanted to leave Mitzrayim. And why do I think that? Because when the shepherds of Avram, the shepherds of Lot, have the dispute, and Avram says, we can't live together. Look, wherever you want, you choose, and I'll go the other way. It says he chooses to go over there by Sodom because he sees that it's like Mitzrayim, it's like Gan Eden, because it's wealth, it's fertile like Mitzrayim was, and he wanted to go back to a place that was like Mitzrayim. And he knows that Mitzrayim was a place of people that were bad, and probably not as bad as Sodom because they weren't destroyed. He knows that they were bad people. He knows that Abraham couldn't change the bad people. Abraham had to get up and leave. If Abraham can't change the people of Mitzrayim, and he wants to go back because he wants to be in a place that's so morally depraved, because he's, and I'm not saying, I think many people choose, Mitzrayim was a place that had a lot to offer in terms of, beauty and all sorts of things, whatever it was. We see he had a house when he was in Sodom, as opposed to a little tent that he had when he was traveling. I mean, things were different, things were better, and he wanted the good life. And he wasn't a leader, and he was affected by the bad. And I think that Abraham was smart enough to catch on to the fact that Lot didn't have that fortitude to really affect change. I really see the conversation back and forth more as twofold. First of all, God understands Abraham, and he gets very emotionally attached to people and things, and destruction was going to really, really negatively affect him. And he lets him go through this because even the prayer itself is healing. I think I take this in a very personal way for myself, because even a lot of times when I'm praying and I know that things can't necessarily change, the pouring my heart out to God and asking and feeling like I did something, it does something for me too, and it helps me accept the situation better. And I think maybe it was done as a little bit as a gift to Abraham, but also for letting Abraham know, because he's making this covenant for Abraham, and we see that God says, should I tell him what I'm going to do to Sodom? Because he's going to have this whole nation that's going to come from him, and he's going to instruct them in my ways. So how can he have Abraham fully accept and make a covenant with God if Abraham doesn't accept everything? The fact that this is a God who gives me miracle blessings, which is wonderful, but it's also a God who will eventually see that justice is done, even if it means destroying all of Sodom and Gomorrah. And that's part and parcel of who God is. And that's part of what Abraham has to accept. And he has to let him know before he fully accepts it and gives him Yitzchak and brings up a child in his ways. Because if he doesn't know what all his ways are, how can he instruct his children in his ways? And that means what we see as good and what we see as bad. So I think all of this is part of the building block for Abraham and for the nations to come out from him to help make, this nation, to help build this nation into what it needs to be. I see it more that way.
Right. So truth be told, until I read this article from Professor Nechama Price, I thought of Lot as, she describes him as the anti-hero, and she actually spends half the essay describing how the different Mefarshim read signs to suggest as such. But then what she does is she says, but there's another way of reading him. For example, you mentioned how Avram took Lot, but as she notes there, the word kicha, to take, is also used with reference to a marriage. Taking can be seen to be forceful, it also can be seen to be a term describing affection and connection. You just mentioned now, and in fact she doesn't say this, but it makes complete sense. One of the psukim just before HaKadosh Baruch Hu speaks to Avram and says to him the plan about Sodom, he says this pasuk, Ki yedativ leman asher tzavet banav v'et beitah charav v'shamur derech Hashem la'asot tzedakah mishpat. Right? He says, you raise people in your home to do the right thing. Who was in Avram's home? The answer is Lot. I think, and this is why I found this insight so attractive and so refreshing, I think part and parcel of this conversation is HaKadosh Baruch Hu assumes that Avram has a view on Sodom because that's where his nephew is. He makes reference to his householders prior to discussing what this plan is. And the subtext of the conversation is, do you think that your member of your household did this? Now, there's further evidence, because what do we see when we get to the next scene, shall we say, in Sodom? We see that Lot does almost the same as Avram. The beginning of the parsha is Avram has guests, and he offers them food, he offers them drink, and he offers them to rest. And the next parak, we have the same thing. Lot does the same. He has malachim, two of the same three malachim. They come to the house. Lot is seemingly doing like for like what Avram does. Now, what I would agree is he doesn't do it effectively. And this is, Professor Price also mentions this. Lot is a bit like Noach, as Chazal compared Noach to Avram. Lot is often compared here to Avram. He may well have been in the right place at the right time to do good things. And notwithstanding the fact that he grew up in the house of Avram, he didn't have truly to himself the qualities that Avram does. There are some people who are just gifted at making a stranger feel at home, and other people don't have that gift. Doesn't mean that their intentions are bad. They just don't have the words. Don't forget Moshe himself, when he's asked to be the leader of the Jewish people, he says, I have all the right intentions, but I don't think I have the right kalim. Avram has a kalim. Lot, regrettably, doesn't. He does try and walk the path of his uncle. He does try and open his house. He does try and show hospitality. The second reading of Lot that Professor Price offers is that Lot chose to go to Sodom because he wants to be like his uncle. His uncle converted the people of Haran. He says, I'm going to convert the people of Sodom. It's a terrible place. They need redemption. I'm going to go. I'm going to be the kiruv worker. I'm going to be the outreach worker. And he goes, but the problem is that though his intentions may well have been, of course, there's a question of interpretation, sincere, he doesn't have it. And so there is this moment when Avram is negotiating with the Kadosh Baruch Hu, expecting for God to say, yeah, well, of course, there's some good people in Sodom. because of your nephew, because you raised him in your home. He doesn't hear it. And I think at that point, the penny drops that Lot isn't made quite in his image. And in fact, and I wrote something about this last week, I think there's something quite tragic about this. When you have members of a household who try to follow in a parent or an uncle or an extended relative's footsteps, but don't quite have it. And I'll tell you a quick anecdote about this, because this is something my father was quite insistent about. My father's a jeweler, and when he was a little younger, he worked for a big company, and then later on he made his own business. And the big company he worked with had lots and lots of jewelers and designers, and eventually the sons of the original owner took over, and within an incredibly short amount of time, the business just went terribly. Why? Because the father believed in the business. He'd built it with his, bare hands. But the sons basically inherited it. They weren't passionate about jewelry making. And so they just wanted to keep it ticking over. So they thought they had the kelim, but they didn't. They knew what other people could do, but it wasn't within their realm to do that same thing. And so similarly, when my father built his own business, he said to us as children, like, I don't need you to do what I do. That's totally fine. I have no expectations that you walk in my footsteps. Be yourself. But too often, children feel that they have to be like their parents. And rather than successfully becoming themselves, they unsuccessfully try and become somebody else. And I see something quite tragic in the personality of Lot. Again, according to this second reading, such that he's trying to be like Avram. And he's trying to go through the motions and be the hospitable one and trying to encourage others. But he's just not good at it. And he doesn't affect change. And he's stuck in storm. And worse still, being stuck in a place where you're not affecting positive change is likely to affect negative change on you. And we see from the way Chazal describe what happens to Malachim when they are proximate to Lot, how they themselves descend, not just because Stom, because Lot isn't being machazek the people. So this is a tragedy of somebody who thought they could make a difference, doesn't. And in the end, has spent too much of his life trying to be somebody he's not.
Right. So I'm still not feeling it, because first of all, I think when we're told Vayikach when Abraham took Lot, I really feel that he took him in terms of, he took responsibility. Look, his brother passed away. This was his nephew. Abraham is not going to leave his nephew, back behind with all these people when he knew that, Lot wanted to go with him. Lot was trying to, at least trying to stay with him for one reason or another. We can say it's for the good. I'm fine with that, thinking that his intention is he sees Abraham as good and he wants to stay with him. But either way, I think that Abraham was doing it out of pure sense of responsibility for his brother. And I think because when and I would love to tell you the truth, I would love to look at Lot in a positive light. I really combed the psukim very carefully, because I think it's very important before you condemn somebody to always look for the best. So I'm okay with thinking he has good intentions, at least in the beginning. But every way that the pasuk tells the narrative, to me, places lots and lots of hints. Especially, people want to compare the fact that he had hachnasat orchim with the way Abraham had hachnasat orchim, but the differences are glaringly obvious. From the beginning to the end. First of all, I want to say that when he pitched his tent, when Abraham told him to move, and he picked Sodom, it says he pitched his tent ad Sodom, until Sodom. And then he doesn't have a tent anymore. He has a house. When they come to me, because come into my house, they come into his house, it's a full-fledged house with a door. He only was moving around with the tent until he got to Sodom. And then he went to settle himself in Sodom. And already, even in the beginning, if you think about the imagery of where Abraham was sitting at the opening of his tent, and it's open for all people, and it's a tent to travel to go, to wherever the alliances are. And Lot is sitting at the sha'ar, and you think of a sha'ar, you think of a gate. A gate is to keep people out, especially in Sodom, right? By sha'ar of Sodom, and we know what Sodom is all about. And then Abraham, he starts off with, come in and you'll wash your feet, and you'll eat a little bit of food, and you'll relax, and he promises, and he gives him a little, he says a little, he does a lot, he gives him everything. From butter, milk, meat, having Sarah, make bread cakes, all of that. And you look at Lot, and what does Lot say? He says, come, stay the night. I want to find the exact words because I feel like the differences are very, very important. He says, come, stay the night, and I have to find it specifically. And he says, it's very, I hate to waste time by looking for something, but he first of all, he says nothing about food. He says, come stay the night, something like this. You'll wash your feet and you'll get up and you'll go in the morning. That's what he says. And then when they say, no, we'll sleep on the street. Okay, so why the angels, first of all, when Abraham offered, they said yes right away. When Lot offered, they said no. They sensed something in the way that he offered it. He said, come sleep and then wash your feet and then get up and leave. That seems fishy. First of all, the order is out of order. You come in, you wash up, then you go to sleep for the night and whatever. And then when he presses them, they listen to him and they come in. It says, what does he do? He makes them a mishteh. A mishteh is he plies them with wine. And then it says, terem yishka, before they lay down. This same word, the shachav, is the same word that it uses with Lot's daughters bed their father. So right before, he's plying them wine. He doesn't make them food. He makes them matzah, something quick, like it's the bare minimum. That's all he gives them is this quick bread that you throw together. And it's before any wrongdoing can be, I think, on his part, because why does it use the word lean and then it uses the word shachav? I think it shows something about Lot's intentions after he plies them with wine in Sodom, in his own house behind closed doors. And again, when the people come and they try and get to Lot's guests, it says that Lot goes out to them and he shuts the door. This is a stark contrast to Abraham. When Abraham's talking to the angels, right? He's doing it by the Petach Halel, and Sarah hears everything. Everything's open. There's nothing to hide, in this tent. And Lot is behind closed doors trying to bargain with them. Take my daughters. These men are mine, and it's behind closed doors. And he doesn't want people to hear. He doesn't want people to know what's going on. And it's such a difference from the way Abraham operates to the way he operates. And all of the little details seem to point to me that Lot was not, having the best of intentions, and that maybe he did. I'm not saying he was all bad. I don't like to, make things, so binary, but he really, at that point, I think was not redeemable. And the reason why I say that even is because we're told in the pasuk that God saved Lot strictly for Abraham's sake, because he knew the kind of mourning and aggravation and depression and whatever it would bring on Abraham, that he wasn't able to protect his nephew. That's why he took his nephew in the first place, take him under his wing to make sure he'd be okay. And if he knew that he couldn't protect his nephew, just like he couldn't protect his brother, I don't think that would be good for his future. So it was strictly for Abraham's sake that God saved Lot. And it wouldn't tell us that I don't think God would be so quick to destroy Lot if he had good and achnasas orachim and he had enough merit to go on to keep him alive. But we're told it was only for Abraham's sake.
So the truth is, firstly, I really appreciate the way you've pulled together all those pieces of evidence. Again, some of which I'm familiar with, and some you've given a great new explanation on it. And I told you only till last week, the only way I related to Lot was precisely that. So you're convincing me of 44 years of thinking that way about this biblical personality, and I'm still processing an alternative approach, which I think has some merit to it. I agree that some issues are a little bit too fishy, some are ambiguous, but I actually think that we're not necessarily disagreeing, because
No.
I believe that when the way I read it and the way I read Professor Price's suggestion, Lot goes to Sodom with good intentions. The problem is, from the moment he gets there, he achieves nothing positive. And we learn, and we're going to be coming to the story of the dream, right, of the Malachim Olim v'Yoredim Bo. If you're not going up, you're going down. If he wasn't being able to be mechazik himself and other people, he himself was lowering. So he may well have gotten to Sodom and be on level A, which is attempting to be like Avraham and not even having the kelim to do so. But every moment, every hour, every day he's there where he's not affecting change, and the people around him are objectively bad. He is absorbing that negativity. He's not able to fight it off, right? Chazal often speak about how you need to make sure you choose the right place to live. The Rambam speaks about Hilchos Deus. We've got in Perkei Avos there, Yoshua and Kisma. And why do we need to live in a neighborhood which is strong? Because it helps us be strong. Now, the question asked by numerous poskim is, so how can you have outreach leaders going to places to Yenevelt? There is himself, by the way, a machloket. There's a great book by Moshe Weinberg, a Jewish outreach halachic perspectives, where he discusses the pros and cons of those choices. I would actually say the following. If you're an oleh, if you're always going up, then yeah, the outside world may well be somewhat of a danger, but you're pushing yourself and you're able to resist that and go beyond. But if you aren't able to be strong, if you're an omed rather than oleh, if you're standing still at best, you're trying to be somebody else, then you're doomed. And that's what Chazal was saying, which is, for the average person, think very carefully about your social circle, about your neighborhood. Because the average person, yes, they should be growing, but oftentimes they're a little bit more static. And it's at that point where you are tremendously susceptible to trouble. I'd say one quick thing, which is that, so we have Lot, who I believe went with more positive intentions, at least based on this rereading of the story. But I agree, though, he descends. And he descends very, very rapidly. And there's a raya that even a holy person could descend very, very rapidly, which is the Malachim. You see, Chazal say when the Malachim went to Avram, they looked like they were eating, but they weren't. Why do they look like they were eating? They practiced derech eretz. So if somebody offers you food, you appear as if you're eating. We see no reference to them looking like they are eating or consuming things in the house of Lot. And in fact, it seems to be that they ate. And the question posed by some Mefarshim is, how could they eat? They're Malachim. And the answer given is, or an answer given, is that they fell, right? They diminished because they were in a negative place. And the Parshas Yosef actually brings a very simple raya, a very simple proof from the Haggadah Shal Pesach, where we're told that when Bnei Yisrael were in the midst of the plagues, Hashem says, I'm going to come to Mitzrayim, ani v'lo malach, ani v'lo saraf, ani hu v'lo achel. He says, I'm going to come and no angel. So why can't an angel come? Angels came and did very different things. The Parshas Yosef, I can't remember if it's quoting somebody else, says that going into Egypt was a very spiritually dangerous business. Even angels could be diminished by being there. Hashem said, to a place that toxic, only I can go. Only I have, the hazmat suit. God's not a person, but even a malach isn't. But only God can be fully protected. Even a malach is in trouble. What happens in the malachim come to Sodom, and Lot's house isn't a beacon of spirituality, right? He may well be going through the motions, maybe trying to be like Avram, but he's not doing it. He's doing it in a kind of almost soulless manner, yeah? Again, to contrast him and Noach, whether their intentions were good, they didn't affect change. There was something missing of their actions, right? Of their ability to have hashpah on other people. And the Malachim come and they sense this. Not only have they got the negativity of Sodom, but they don't have the anchor. They don't have this protective home that should have been the home of Lot. and they themselves are in trouble, and they themselves fall, and that's why they themselves are eating. And in fact, a few years ago, I was learning a sefer called the Siftei Kohen, which is a more Kabbalistic reading of the Torah. Not that I understand these kind of things so much, but I came across something which really startled me, which is, I referred to the story of Yaakov's dream, yeah? And there you have the Malachim, Olim v'Yordim. And the Siftei Kohen asks a really simple question. You know, when you got a really sophisticated sefer that asks a simple question, you ask yourself, how come I didn't think of it? Which is, why do angels need a ladder? They can fly, right? We speak about angels being able to be, right, flying from place to place. Why do they need ladders? He says the problem is these are malachim that went a lot, and they lost their ability to fly. They were, you know, you heard the Christian idea of fallen angels, but this apparently is, you know, there is an element of this in our tradition. These angels fell. They needed a ladder. And only through, we see that as a story develops, that itself changes. They themselves heal. But if a malach, if an angel, is affected by the negativity and toxicity of stom, alachat kama b'kama, that's what happens to Lot, who isn't able to resist, who isn't able to be strong, who isn't able to have ashpah. That tells us two things. Number one is never be an omed, always be a haylech, right? Never be somebody who stands, always be somebody who progresses, who is growing. Be a growth-oriented Jew. Every one of us needs to be that. Whatever growth we're doing, we need to be moving forward. That's davar rishon. Davar sheni is no person can think that falling is beyond their capability. If a malach can fall, then an Avram can fall. And if Avram can fall, then for sure a Lot can fall, and then all of us. No person should presume that they are untouchable spiritually. They can't have, can't be affected by others. But there is one third lesson, which is, if you are being mechazek others, it helps strengthen yourself. And I personally have felt this many times. I made a choice quite a few years ago to say, I want to put more energy and effort into being mechazek others. And boy, has it strengthened me. Doesn't mean that I'm necessarily worthy to give chizuk to others, but when you do, and you do so with a good intention, it strengthens you. Lot wasn't doing that, and it meant he was weak. And that had an impact on those who came to his home, had an impact on the final decision made about Sdom. It disappointed Avram, because he would have thought that Lot could have made a difference. And in the end, he didn't. So though I agree that there are lots of very worrying signs about the choices like Lot makes beforehand, and I totally agree. And again, only till last week, that's how I read the story, that Lot is this anti-hero in contrast to Avram. I think there was another way to tell his story, but that changes the moment he goes to Sdom and is unable to be mechazek others and stand still, and then himself falls. He, like the angel, decreases in his capacity neither to affect change on himself, on others, but also himself. And then that radiates a certain negativity too, and that radiation is felt by the malachim who go to his house, who then actually eat, because no longer are they on that level. They're now people who actually need a ladder to get to heaven.
Right. Very good. But I also just want to point out that perhaps, you know, and it reminds me of what we were saying in the beginning of Abraham taking counsel with Mamre. You know, it bothers me in the story when the shepherds are having the dispute and he doesn't try to work it out with Abraham. Abraham says, you know, you go one way, I'll go the other. What happened to working it out? What happened to a give and take? What happened to him giving, you know, some sort of rebuke to his shepherds? But if you're not willing to take counsel for somebody else, and if you think you've got it all figured out, and if you think you can go and do things on your own that way, that is not the recipe for success. And I think that that's part and parcel of maybe his failure, is maybe not working well with others and thinking that he can just do without, you know, doing with others. He couldn't change Sdom alone. That's not something he was going to be able to do. You know, even Abraham, like you said, he had 3 alliances, 3 strong alliances with him. And when he made the Nefesh and Haran, it said they did it. He had a team. You have to have a team, and you don't have a team. You're working by yourself. It's not a good way to begin a mission like that. So I think that was also maybe, and when you speak about whether you can do outreach, whether you can go, I think a lot of these Chabad families that do it are amazing, but whether they make sure that they're married with kids, they have a good union. Lot, we know his wife was not the epitome of righteousness herself, so he was really going alone. Sarah's, when Abraham hosts the guests, he tells Sarah to make the cakes. They're working as a unit. You don't see Lot asking his wife anything. As a matter of fact, we're told she snitches on to the neighbors. So, if you don't have a good team with you, it's not going to work. And I think that's why maybe the Chabad is so successful. They take these strong couples that have a very strong union, and they set them out together as a family unit. People can come to their home for Shabbat because they're all working together. And I think that's part and parcel also of what can make or break a person. And I just want to thank you so much, because I like the fact that you point out all the good, and that there is, I'm sure there's a lot that can be redeemed, and that we should look at that and not focus on, I think we should always try our hardest to find the best in every character that there is. And, especially nowadays where everybody's always looking to say, well, that one thing makes that person evil. We should go up over and above to make sure to point out any good that we see in anybody. It doesn't come without, doesn't give them a free pass just because they're good, but to acknowledge, to know how to differentiate. And it's an important thing.
Right. I think, and again, I can take my hat off to Professor Nechama Price, who really brought me to this alternative reading. But her conclusion is really what I'd say, which is, I can't be machriah which way to read the text, but what I can say is the text is a little more ambiguous than I originally thought. And that makes Lot a little bit more complex than often many of us think. And I think over time, the beauty about our tradition is we don't ever say we're done reading Chumash. We read these stories every year with fresh eyes, and we say, I see things here that I didn't see before, qualities of people I didn't recognize, weaknesses in others I didn't notice. And so it's always a great opportunity every year to relearn these parishes, and I really appreciate the opportunity to talk through these ideas with you, because truth is, I think some of your critiques have a lot of merit of this thesis, but nevertheless, these stories are fascinating, and in particular, I think there's an important lesson to be learned to bring together what we see from Avram and what we see of Lot. There is parallelisms that are built into this story that the reader is being asked to consider. Are they being contrasted? Is it Avram versus Lot, as some people may say? Or are they being put together and saying, this is Avram and this is Lot? They're trying to do the same thing, but one person isn't succeeding, and here's some suggestions why. And as I mentioned, oftentimes I think that's happens in educational settings in homes. We want people to be like us. That's a failing, that's a mistake. And that's what Rav Hirsch talks about in terms of Yitzchak with Yaakov and Esau, right? You've got to make sure that people are treated and raised individually rather than presuming if they look the same or sound the same or grow up in the same home, they have to be the same. That's not what our Masorah is all about. And it seems to be Lot had a different derech, and perhaps he didn't find it. And that's a great tragedy of the story.
All right. Thank you so much.
My pleasure.
Great discussion, and hope that we shall have more in the future. And thank you so much for your time. And for everybody, find Rav Johnny, follow him. You won't be sorry.
Okay. Thank you so much, Elisa. Take care. Bye.